Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. I am Nicole BC, and you know everything. For anyone who's been paying any attention to this, to me, to the world, I think this episode might be particularly useful. What I'm talking about today is the glow up post blow up. And if you've really been paying attention, I was talking a lot about this, I think in 2022. And this idea of contraction and expansion, that generally after a huge growth spurt, it's followed by growing pains. And there have been a few episodes about this. And having just spent the last 3 months in probably one of my lowest, most uninspired spaces, I feel like I'm on the other side of that now with a hell of a lot of insight, a lot of lessons learned, because truly the last 3 years have been really challenging. And showing up with this podcast, with my work, for my family, for my friends, for our communities, was obviously not and always my best work. But in this moment, it really feels like all of the stars are aligning. And it occurred to me that there is no escape from the contraction post expansion. And in as much as I thought maybe we're creating that mental construct, or maybe it's like, if you're into astrology, or even when you get into sort of your own like rituals and superstitions around, say, fitness or creativity or work and productivity, or even just like going out and having fun, we can sometimes start to think that like, if we do this, then we get that. And it becomes this expectation that can feel very illusory in the sense that like, is it real or are we making it real? Is it a, what do they call it in science, a placebo? Is it psychosomatic? Is it our minds creating it, or is it real? And I had played with this idea that maybe we don't need to contract after expansion. Maybe we can just have a very slow gradient of a linear path towards success. And I have yet to discover that experiment. I've yet to have proven that experiment true, right? But I have definitely aced the glow up post blow up. So what I want to talk about today is why your breakdown is the setup for your breakthrough. And if you ever feel like the rug has been ripped out from under you, like everything you've built, and I'm talking everything, my friends, your career, your business, your relationships, your community, your home, just collapsed overnight, that might be more metaphorical than literal. But for a lucky few of us, it's incredibly literal and incredibly relevant in this moment right now. I'm telling you that when you can hold that faith, when you can keep the candle burning for the other side of the blow up, there will be light at the end of the tunnel. And I am currently playing with the idea that maybe, just maybe, the breakdown is necessary for the breakthrough. And I'm going to talk about why I think that's happening, because there's obviously a pattern here. And sure, like I said, I am an expert. I'm getting my PhD in breakdowns and breakthroughs, but there's a lot out there. And it's funny because I have very recently, I would say like in the last sort of 6 to 12 months, gotten much more interested in researching these podcasts. It took so long for me to actually put these together and figure out what I was going to talk about and just get them out there, getting over that hurdle. But obviously after you do something over and over again, you get more efficient at it. And efficiency is something I'm usually always optimizing. So now I have this opportunity to actually research. And I didn't want to research when I first started because I felt like such a fucking fraud even getting out there and talking about shit for 20 to 40 minutes every week. It felt like I had something to prove, like I had to defend myself. But in the episodes that I've researched and batch processed for this, this moment's recording, there's there's so many cool studies out there and there's so much cool research being done out there. Like it's actually fun to realize other people are talking about this. Other people are hypothesizing around this. And in fact, there are so many necessary steps along our pathway to success. I find it really useful to investigate those, to see what's working for other people. I have this knee-jerk reaction to doing the opposite of everyone else, and oftentimes at my own detriment. But this research process gives me ideas and inspiration so that I can test my own way and 100% feel supported, even when I am in the darkest cave and longest night of the soul, right? These patterns, these glow ups, post blow ups, feel like are occurring on a universal basis. They're happening economically speaking. They're happening across businesses and economies. I just said economics, but like creativity, relationship, growth, skill sets, everything we're engaging in seems to have this wave-like peaks and valleys pattern. I say that right before the point being, even nature itself moves in these cycles of contraction and expansion, death and then rebirth, joy and then the decline. The fall always comes before the rise. So let's do a little bit of storytelling. Sorry, I lost my notes here. There we go. We're going to talk about some real world stories, some strategies, and what you can do when you're feeling like you're being squeezed so hard you can't breathe. The contraction is literally crushing you. Because if I've learned anything in this life, that's inevitable. And we don't have to let it take us out, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully it won't be quite as dark. That felt really like dark and heavy. So I am going to talk about some of the hidden psychological and business patterns behind every major success story. I'm also going to give you 3 strategies for surviving the contraction when it feels like it's crushing you. And finally, we'll finish with 3 groundbreaking gems on why contraction is the ultimate catalyst for your comeback. A secret spark for a serious surge. So firstly, let's get into some of the nerd stuff. The science of expansion and contraction, why setbacks are cyclical. And this isn't just a cute motivational phrase. And it's funny because growth mindset came up first. And I was like, fuck growth mindset. Everybody's talking about growth mindset. And this is probably going to weave in and out the next few episodes, because a growth mindset in those deep, dark night, cave-like moments in life, that is how you hold the faith. It's by recognizing this is a necessary part of the process. This isn't the end. This is just the challenge where I get to show up and prove it. That's one of the many opportunities or one of the many potentials that a growth mindset offers. It's not just like, I'm committed to development and growth. It's also when things are going very south, very quickly, very unplanned and undesired, someone with a growth mindset will be like, okay, I guess this is happening, perhaps maybe even because it's supposed to. That said, here's an example of me having to go the opposite grain and spend 2 more extra hours researching shit. There's some really geeky science behind some of the psychology in terms of how to weather the storm, find the calm within the storm, and everybody knows it's like the day after a storm that is absolutely gorgeous, right? So the disintegration precedes reintegration. This is a psychological principle technically referred to as positive disintegration, developed by psychiatrist Kazimierz Dabrowski. We got another ski in there. I found a few skis recently. We're smart. This research found that true personal growth only happens after a breakdown. The old habits, beliefs, ways of thinking, they have to fall apart before a stronger, more evolved version of yourself can emerge. This means that your burnout, your business failure, your heartbreak, it's not the end. It's actually the process working exactly as it should. And perhaps you may notice the allegory for larger cycles that are also experiencing breakdown, right? So positive disintegration. Secondly, the very obvious, we talk about them all the time, the boom and bust cycles in the economies. Every single massive financial downturn, the Great Depression, the 2008 crash, and what's interesting in this research, there was the COVID market collapse, which I don't know if we ever actually identified it as that. I certainly did, but all of these different collapses led to unprecedented periods of innovation and growth. The 2008 recession, it crushed businesses, but it also birthed Uber, Airbnb, and Slack. The dot-com crash of 2000, Amazon almost died, but then it restructured and became, well, an egregore, a $1 trillion empire. It's like its own metaverse in and of itself. Why? Because contraction forces reinvention. It destroys the unsustainable and makes way for something stronger. And kind of like I was saying, with that growth mindset, we have this ability to ask, what if this is exactly what's supposed to happen? Because if it were meant to work, it would have. If it were meant to be, it'd be being. It being. So that simple release to the attachment of what was, it's literally what orients you to what can be. So lastly, the biological law of adaptation. Nature itself is built on expansion and contraction. Muscles only grow after they tear. Forests regenerate because of wildfires. Even birth itself, there is a death that occurs. Talk to any mother. It is a painful, crushing process. Should have trigger warning, before new life emerges. But every single one of my girls who have been through the matrescence recognizes like that life could not have come without the death of many things for them. Contraction isn't failure. It's nature's blueprint for transformation. We're back. Speaking of back, did I just yell that? Did that just get really loud? Speaking of being back, I want to share a few comeback stories with you, both personal, but on a celebrity scale. And then you probably watched the documentary or are familiar with both of these, or maybe none of them. But point being, there are several. I mean, there are innumerous examples of incredible comebacks. And if you looked into these people's lives or into these companies' back offices, it would never have looked like they were going to turn it around. And they did. So what happened there? Firstly, Keanu Reeves. This might have been a little ChatGPT inspired, not going to lie, but I wanted to find a couple different examples, some relatable, some not. But like with the relatable examples, like kind of like my interviews, sometimes I wonder how useful it is to find somebody that like nobody's ever talked about or you don't know, or I'm sharing one of my little anecdotal stories about one of my clients or one of my friends or my own experiences. And I mean, look, if you want more of that, let me know, reply, email me, hello@NicoleBZ.com. I'll continue to share my stories. But I also think it's kind of fun to find some of these because when things happen on a grander scale, and I work on this with my clients a lot, as you start playing bigger and bigger games, the risks that you take and therefore the losses that you experience are going to be bigger and bigger. And so it's one thing to go, well, I lost property and value and home in a 7-figure endeavor, but then you look at your friends and it's 8 and it's 5 people, or you look at an entire community and it's billions of dollars wiped off the cap table. And you think, well, my problems aren't that big. I do think it's all relative. And also, I know I feel more inspired when I feel like someone was able to endure something 100x what I've personally experienced, and yet they still seem to be going strong, right? So with that, first example, Keanu Reeves. I didn't know this. I think this is one of the reasons I wanted to share this, but Keanu Reeves, he lost his best friend, his child was stillborn, and his partner passed away. He was completely written off. And then John Wick. Have you watched John Wick? I've watched John Wick and I actually found it really entertaining. I'm pretty into sci-fi, comic book. If I'm going to watch a big movie, especially on a big screen, I want it to be pretty sensational. John Wick was pretty fucking sensational. There's also a bunch of badass bitches in it, which I think in another life I was an assassin, but I digress. John Wick forced Keanu Reeves to train for months, reinvent himself, and come back harder than ever. He didn't just revive his career, he redefined an entire genre. If Keanu's life teaches us anything, it's that the glow up follows the blow up. I legit was today years old when I learned that he'd gone through all of that. Okay, so another story you're probably very familiar with, Nike. Nike was almost bankrupt before it birthed a global giant. And before Nike became the juggernaut that we know, it was a disaster. If you haven't seen the movie, I think it's called, I don't remember what it's called at all. But I do remember Ben Affleck's character, who was like the CEO of Nike at the time, running and saying running is suffering. And I felt so validated in that moment. But it's a really great movie. And I don't say that very often. So I highly recommend. But Nike was an absolute disaster. It was drowning in debt. It was losing lawsuits, and it had almost gone bankrupt. The financial contraction forced Phil Knight to radically shift the company's model. He doubled down on innovation. He signed Michael Jordan when no one else believed in him and created the Air Jordan, now the most profitable sneaker in history. If Nike hadn't been forced to rethink everything, they wouldn't be the brand they are today. And I think we see that so often in the breakdown is it truly eliminates any stagnant energy. And so many of us love what's familiar, but sometimes that familiar is a real rut. Patti Smith, who some of you, if you don't know, stop listening to this podcast right now. Patti Smith, the punk rock poet queen, was homeless and broke, and not when it was cool to be fucking homeless and broke, in like when she was my age. She's in New York City. She is sleeping in abandoned buildings. She's barely scraping by, and she writes horses. Then, I mean, I don't know how many times this woman, I don't even want to say she's reinvented herself, because Patti Smith has always been Patti Smith, but she found an entirely new genre and an entirely new medium within which to work. That you can at me on that one. That's very debatable. Words. But the point being, everyone had written her off as a has-been, and the suffering, the contraction, the failure, it became the fuel for one of the greatest rock albums of all time, and a book and a speaking career. And I mean, Patti Smith is absolutely iconic and was also homeless. Or unhoused. Are we saying that? Yeah, we are. So let's talk about what happens if you find yourself in one of those periods where it feels like the walls are crumbling down around you and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So the Phoenix cycle reframe. When you're in a contraction period, name it. Literally tell yourself, I'm in a Phoenix cycle. That's very romantic. I'm pretty sure all of you listening know what I'm referring to. The Phoenix rises from the ashes, but the Phoenix has to burn before it rises. This simple mindset shift keeps you from seeing failure as permanent. I used to, when I first moved to Australia, and I was completely reestablishing myself. That was like I was going to say a purposeful burn, but I really had just underestimated, as I do every time I move, which I love doing because it's like this forced reinvention, reinvention. That's the word, reinvention process. I just find that so often your identity, these things that we are attached to, these things that have become familiar, are actually reflected back at us. So when we remove ourselves from the familiar, it forces us to dig deep into who are we truly, really, when nobody else gives a shit, right? When nobody else even notices, let alone knows who you are. And it gives you this internal sense of knowing who you are, what you're about, what matters to you, because that is going to change as you evolve. Yeah, I'm sticking by that one. So I like this concept of naming the epoch that you're in. It gives us a sense of romance, this sort of real hero's journey element to it. But when I first moved to Australia, I called it my self-induced professional development program, because it made it feel like I was signing up for school. Like I would go to these conferences, I would go to these networking events, I would find myself at gigs, and I almost took on this persona of like, the eager beaver student, the kind of leaving the apple on the teacher's desk and being gregarious in my extroversion and just walking up to people and talking to them and looking at it like, no, I'm here for a reason, and it's to learn and to connect. And I am going to be the stupidest, lowest person on this totem pole for obvious reasons that I didn't feel a lot of ownership around. It's because I had put myself in this completely, literally foreign situation, and I had completely underestimated how challenging that would be. So I was like willing to get beat up all day, every day in order to get better at the fight and get stronger and really sort of establish myself as some like lightweight in the ring, right? And people would ask me, not a lot of people around me were doing that, were putting themselves in these, especially in these kind of like networking. I was really excited about the Australian government because they funded the arts, which I just didn't realize was happening here in the United States, but it seemed really accessible, mainly because I started winning grants really early on. And I think it was because I was representing and working with artists that felt very fringe. Anywho, I just started trying all of these different things that I don't know I would have had I not thought about it in terms of this professional development program. Like I would literally look at it like I was building out a syllabus and just looking for free things to go to or books to read or who wrote that book. Are they speaking anywhere? So anywho, that was a little bit of a side quest there, but name it. Where are you at? If this truly does feel like a transformational moment, there's probably a pretty cool, pretty exciting frame, like literally, to give you a little bit of insight. Is that the right word I'm looking for? To just give you context. That's the word I'm looking for why this challenge, you know? Another way to survive the crushing contraction is to switch into the 10-year you perspective shift. So ask yourself, what would future me say about this moment 10 years from now? Chances are your future you would laugh, would pat you on the back and say, this is just the beginning, my friend. I was thinking about this. I've mentioned this in a few different podcasts, but I was talking with a friend the other day who was also in the middle of this like transformational moment in his life and career. And I didn't have the opportunity to share this, but I'll share it with you instead. This moment right now will be a memory from that future version of yourself. You will look back on this, listening to this delightful podcast you cannot get enough of, and think, God, I was really in it in that moment. And BZ reminded me that one day this will all just be a distant memory and I'll be kicking ass and taking names and doing everything I set out to in this transformational Phoenix cycle that I very purposefully chose for a reason, because what was isn't going to be any longer. And I am totally opening to all the potential that's available to me that I'm going to create space for by burning it down, letting it go, turning my back on it, and being willing to try something new. So that 10-year you is very available to you. You can converse with it. You can free write to tap into their knowledge. You can ask it questions. You can meditate. You can go for walks and kind of have an open dialogue. Like I will talk out loud sometimes. Hopefully I was doing that at the yoga studio the other day and somebody said, I'm sorry, what? And I was like, oh, this is just a conversation between me and me. See your way out of it. Thanks. So anywho, you take your level of crazy, but 10-year future you knows exactly how they got there, and they are available to you whenever you want to have a chat with them. Lastly, the strategic retreat move. Sometimes contraction is an invitation to step back before stepping up. Businesses, athletes, artists, all intentionally contract. They pause, regroup, and come back stronger. Give yourself permission to do the same. The way I got through this last one, and this was not by choice, this was not intentional, but I feel like I laid on the ground in the fetal position and cried for like 3 months straight. I go into like dark mode, and I've actually always done that because I tend to work really, really, really hard. And it's easy to label it as burnout, but I had such a repetitive version of this. Like anytime you would come off tour on the road or anytime I'd like launch a new project, I have anywhere from about 3 weeks to like 3 months of just nonstop go. But the longer that stretches, then the longer the recuperation time. Women have this kind of built-in break in their monthly cycle, which I very much took advantage of. But I also am just getting more used to what this incarnation, this version of me needs. And so as an example, I just traveled for about 9 days and I used to just be able to hop off a plane and hit it. And there was no need to take some downtime, but I purposefully planned it. In my mind, it was a 10-day trip because I knew that day after traveling, I was going to take it it was going to be completely quiet with like no sensory input. So there is very much something in that recovery phase and that healing phase and giving yourself the space you need to be able to integrate all of the lessons learned to truly understand why things didn't work. And that gives you permission to leave them here and not feel bad or guilty or resentful or regretful about what happened. I'm going to be recording something on regret next-ish. Anywho, so just to reiterate, 3 things you can do when you feel like you're getting crushed by life: reframe, rename, give yourself context, give this moment a fun little title, step it way out, go way far into the future to give yourself a little bit of perspective on what this is right now, and even perhaps dialogue with that version of you to give yourself some support, or just like take a knee, take a beat, take a pause. Sometimes it's voluntary, sometimes it's very much forced, but trust that there's a reason you need a break right now and you're taking it. So I also kind of like to highlight a few things you can do that feel very available and at like very low cost or investment, whether that's financial or time or even energy. So something I will do when I feel crushed in the moment is like I make giant piles of shit, whether it's to-dos or, I'll clean out drawers, I'll clean out closets. I tend to move these piles around my house for an entire day, but in doing so, they get a little bit smaller all of the time. But just like clear your environment, whatever that means to you. I just swept a bunch of leaves off of the porch, like moving furniture, switching up your workspace. Have you ever done like a home vacation where you just go sleep in a different room for a night? I know it sounds ridiculous, but like give it a go. Switch things up. Maybe you don't have to burn it all down. You just give yourself a little break from your usual routine, that very familiar rut. It might be interesting what you see. I remember one sort of, coach guru talking about like take a walk around the block backwards. Granted, do that safely, but kind of wild, like what happens when you do that. And it's just all these, it's like brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand. Different things pop into your brain hole when you switch things up. Reinvent your routine. So add one new habit: reading before bed, reading when you wake up, cold shower. Small changes can equal really big mental shifts. A 2-day reset. Take 48 hours away from screens. If that doesn't feel available to you, try 3. Did I just hit the microphone? Try 3. Like I usually encourage people to start with 30 minutes. Most of us have a pretty serious addiction to our phones, and no judgment. They're literally designed to be addictive. So give yourself a space to once again break up that routine. And then lastly, a micro win strategy. Set a goal you can crush in 24 hours. A lot of us probably let ourselves down first before we do anybody else. And we lack the confidence or the faith in ourselves to actually do the dang thing because we've let ourselves off the hook so many times. And I'm not even going to get into the why or what behind that, but pick one thing you're pretty sure you can do and set that as a goal. And then when you do it, really celebrate it. Don't make it anything too fancy or too crazy. Wash your car if you have a car, clean the bathroom. Like I go to cleaning a lot because that feels like very accessible. I can do it really quickly and I can know I did a good job. I also feel great after it's done, but you've got a lot of things in your life like that: going for a walk, doing some breath work, doing a meditation, taking a freaking nap, calling that person you've been thinking about but haven't reached out to. Just any one of those little things. You can just put it on a calendar for like 24 hours, sometime between now and tomorrow. You're going to get it done. These are just little teeny glow up activities you can pre-program into your recovery phase to see what starts to shift. So we're getting there. We're almost done. I want to just offer you, when I talk about like keeping the faith and holding space, I was burning that candle, knowing that at some point the sun's going to rise again. Recognize the collapse is clarity. When life contracts, it reveals what actually matters. The things that survive the blow up, those are the things you were meant to build on. It has always surprised me what sticks around after complete and utter destruction. The relationships and friends that I have, those friends that stuck with me through the various moves. And there's been very few occasions where it was a result of something truly awful happening. Most of the time, I just got to be in my bonnet about being somewhere else. And The people who stuck around, the habits that stuck around, the lifestyle choices that stuck around, there are things that I see as now being fundamental pieces of me. And also being very aware they might not make it through the next transition, shall we say. But the collapse does give you clarity about what's really important, especially when it is something very traumatic and really awful, like we've all just kind of been through in the last few months. I'm recording this in February of 2025. It's given me so much perspective on what's important and what matters. And I'm so grateful for that, because there's been a lot of bullshit coming up in these last few months that I've been like, it's not a real problem. Like it feels real. They're telling you it's real, but the reality is like roof, safe, sheltered, food, water. I'm pretty fucking privileged in this moment. Success isn't linear. It's a spiral. I talk about that a lot. Read The Loop. You don't just go up, you 100% spiral, you loop. And every expansion is followed by contraction. But each time you rise higher than before. It's like when I talk about, the same problem showing up again, it can feel like we're repeating patterns. But I guarantee you're coming back around with bigger perspective, with more skills, and with wisdom that you didn't have the first time around, or maybe the 18th time around. And something I've definitely been experiencing recently is, what if this does get to be your last loop? What are you going to learn and integrate and commit to ensure that this is it? Bye-bye with that particular pattern. The only way to lose is to stop moving, is to give up, is to say, okay, well, this is the end. And that has 100% carried me through every single one of these hardcore destructive moments in my life, is to recognize this is just a moment, this too shall pass. And unless I decide this is where I crumple up and die, it's just going to be another part of my story and a segment on my journey, but not the final destination. So as long as you keep going, contraction can't break you, because contraction isn't an ending. It is simply a redirection. So trust, my friend, trust that the expansion is coming. If you've been in contraction for months and even years, I'm raising my hand for anybody listening, at both hands actually, and now my camera's doing weird stuff. If you've been in a contraction for years, you might start to think, what if this is just my life now? But look at your own history. You've been through hard times before, and every single time you got through it. Write down 3 past contractions that led to something better. That's your proof. And I would love for you to share that with the listeners. Wherever you're listening, you can comment pretty much on all of the platforms now. Your contraction, your willingness to share this experiment is going to help somebody else who's listening and in it. So thank you. Trust physics. This isn't just about mindset. Nature requires equilibrium. If you've been in extreme contraction, energy must move back towards expansion. This isn't hope. It's a fundamental law of reality. What goes up must come down. What goes down must come up. Find someone else who has expanded after a long contraction. And again, this doesn't have to be in IRL. The URL could be very useful in this instance. I listed 3 different examples earlier. Success leaves clues. Find someone who went through a massive contraction, bankruptcy, rock bottom, addiction, a creative drought, and then they came out the other side. If it happened for them, it can happen for you. Ooh, and I did just wanted to leave a little Easter egg here about how to speed this process up, because if you're anything like me, you're very impatient and you're sick of this fucking bullshit. Make a radical shift. If you feel stuck in contraction, it means the expansion wants to happen. You're fucking over it. And I talk a lot about that in energy leadership. If you recognize you're in level 1, you're like, oh, I'm feeling so sorry for myself, I'm having a giant pity party for 1, you're already out of level 1. Level 1 doesn't have that awareness. Where I was at after my mom's funeral, getting scammed, hurricane, destruction, that was it. That's all I had available to me. I had no capacity for anything. If you reached out to me, I couldn't answer my phone. I wasn't eating. I lost a bunch of weight. I was so contracted. I was literally in my own world. The second you realize oh my God, I'm so contracted, I'm in my own world, you're not there anymore. You're fucking over it. You can make radical shifts. For me, this looked like calling my doctor and being like, hey, I need help. Probably mental health, of the mental health variety. And I started seeing a talk therapist for the first time in 20 fucking years. It's not my favorite modality, but it's what was available to me. Small, radical shift. If you've been doing the same thing and expecting a different result, shake it up. Take a different route to work. Start a new hobby. Say yes to something unexpected. Tiny shifts really do create momentum. I will also go into I call it like a yes phase, talking about like rename the epic. And I'll just say yes to everything. I did that when I first moved here. It's kind of one of my hacks for when I first moved somewhere. But absolutely, when I feel like I am moving towards depression, which is a reality I just need to keep in my awareness for me, I'll start saying yes to everything just to expose myself to new things, new people, new environments, new energies. And believe me, it does not always go well. And it feels like I'm investing into opportunity, into potential. Even if those bets aren't paying off, I realize by simply saying yes, I'm creating that radical shift. Start a tiny expansion ritual. I'm using air quotes for those of you just listening. Expansion isn't just about big wins. Every day, do something you've lost touch with. Expansion thrives in small, consistent actions. I was talking with someone who is a writer, and they've just published their first novel. They're very, very disappointed with the sales and blah, 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 blah. And they're a substitute teacher to pay their bills. And they had reached out to me because they hate substitute teaching. They don't want to do it anymore. And all they want to do is write. And I asked them how much they were writing. Nope, they weren't writing at all. And I said, but you're a writer. And they said, well, I published my book in the summer. And so I've just been like very contracted after. And I said, then write. See what happens. And then they gave me this huge spiel about how the type of writer they are is very inspired by the muse and they can only write when they feel inspired. And I said, that's fantastic. I'm not asking you to write another novel. I'm just asking you to write. Journal, write a list of to-dos, write out a recipe to cook, like write your friend a letter. There is 1,000 different types of writing that can be done out of this commitment to expansion. And they don't all have to be fine art styles of writing. It can just be writing. But I guarantee you, if you prioritize that which you define yourself by and make it the anchor of your day, it's going to shift something. Do something that feels like growth. Just like read a page of a book, try a new food, text somebody you lost touch with. I already threw that one in there. That's a great one. On Fridays, I used to make it a habit to reach out to at least 3 people I hadn't reached out to in like ideally at least 6 months, but just to let them know I was thinking about them. Sometimes I just scroll through my phone and or like my contacts and just kind of randomly pick somebody. And then I'd share something that I fondly remembered about them. It felt amazing. So small, consistent actions are where this shift, this expansion truly thrives. And just test it. As per always, this isn't me telling you what to do. This is just me throwing a bunch of shit against the wall. You see what sticks, my friend. Lastly, if this may or may not work for everybody, but create some kind of a container for this expansion. So that can look like setting a date. That can look like by summer, I will. That can look like, academic years or an alarm. I had an alarm go off on my phone earlier. I set little alarms when I am personally in like a reinvention phase. I'll set little alarms on my phone periodically throughout the day to remind me, like, where's your head at? Where's your heart at? Like, what are you focusing on? What are you investing your energy into? Because it's very easy to default towards old patterns. So create a hard deadline, interpret that however you want, for reinvention. Give yourself a date, a specific time of day, a season, like I said, and just say, by this day, I will have made a bold move. It could be launching the business. It could be hitting publish. It could be moving. It could even just be quitting something that's draining you. When you set a deadline, your brain starts working towards expansion automatically. It gives you this anchor point, this sense of certainty. It's an illusion, but the point is our ego loves certainty, the how and the when. Everybody says, but how, but when, but how? Like, well, when is it all going to happen? Pick a fucking date. It doesn't matter if that like realizes whatever dream or desire we're complaining about. It's just pick a date and see what happens. See what happens if you treat that date like everything changes on it. What do you do in preparation or in the runway towards that date? Expansion is coming because expansion is always coming. You don't have to wait for it. You can meet it halfway. So what is a bold move you can make today to jumpstart your expansion? Again, please share. I would love to know. And believe me, someone else listening would probably get a really big kick out of it, if not just a kick up the bum. So I think that's all I got. Where did we land? Ooh, okay. Do you see that camera? Woo! I don't know if it looks like it's going to be a little off kilter, but we got the 2 cameras going again. That was an old school BZ thing. See, big, bold moves happening every dang day. Thank you so much for being here. I love you. I have to